Okay, maybe I'll just recap some of the things we've talked about recently, and then we can decide what we're talking about today. So we talked a few times about independent research, with the AI safety community being one of the examples. We talked about mentorship in that context and more broadly. We talked about Musk's new AI organization, XAI, and many other things. What's happened since we spoke last? Well, there was this brouhaha about LK99, which seems to have kind of settled down, and the usual AI updates. I'm not sure there's anything too dramatic since we last spoke. Can you think of anything?
Nothing substantive. I mean, there are what did I see recently? The CEO of Anthropic, which is the organization or corporation company that is behind the creation of Claude and Claude 2, those LLMs, which seem to be, I don't know how much of a contender that their products are, but anyway, this person is thinking that we are only one or two generations, not many generations of successor LLMs to Bard and GPT-4 from a properly general artificial intelligence. I'm not sure what kind of caveats come with that, but the idea that it could be one of the upcoming offerings and not something multiple generations from now, I suppose, that could be could pass muster as general artificial intelligence. That seems plausible if you squint at it the right way and you ask the right people.
Yeah.
I'm not sure I would necessarily agree with all of the assumptions you have to make about the capabilities or lack thereof of such systems in order for it to properly qualify as artificial general intelligence. But they're nevertheless quite extraordinary claims from a fairly reputable source, and so I paid attention to that in the news cycle. But as far as other key news and changes in the space, I haven't seen anything, sort of profound or really transformative in the last couple of weeks. Have you seen anything that's really caught your attention?
Yeah, I guess I see something every day, and it's sort of hard to remember what has happened since we spoke last, but maybe not too many major things. There was this congressional testimony from the CEO of Anthropic, Dario Amodei, and other figures. I'm not sure if that happened before or after the last time we had one of these. So I think that maybe there's not too much technical AI news, but there's certainly a lot of motion at the moment in terms of governance and regulation and attempts by the powers that be to wrap their heads around what's happening. This recent podcast with Dario Amodei has been on a publicity tour, giving many interviews and doing a variety of podcasts, which is very interesting and quite positive, I think. I have a high opinion of Anthropic, both research-wise and in terms of genuinely attempting to tackle this very, very thorny trade-off, where by being on the frontier of capabilities, they're attempting to leverage that position to make safety more of an active concern, both in terms of funds spent on research and also in terms of attention from regulators than it otherwise would be. And it's interesting. Maybe this is something we can talk about briefly. I'll outline the situation and then see what your opinion is. So there are many critics of OpenAI and Anthropic who would say, well, on the one hand, you talk about, it's very surreal to see statements from senior figures in these organizations saying, we're probably dead with probability 50% or something, right? Or just to give a very large range of potential, to say that it's very uncertain and maybe, as the uncertainty is such that maybe with probability 90% things go badly and the human race goes extinct. That's a very strange claim to hear from the head of an organization that's sort of in the public consciousness, rising a bit like a big tech company like Google in its heyday before it was big, but when it was clearly like on the rise. It's a strange kind of statement to hear from a public company getting a lot of press. You don't hear like, when Apple was founded and Steve Jobs was kicking ass in his younger days, you didn't hear the head of research inside Apple speculating that, maybe the personal computer might end humanity or something. It's a very strange kind of configuration. Anyway, so the critics would say, well, you're so concerned about this technology being dangerous and that yet here you are building it. It's a very strange thing to both foretell the doom and be building the doom. On the other hand, the people inside these organizations would say, well, this was predetermined in some sense. Maybe, individual decisions can push it in terms of the time frame of AGI forward or backward by months or years. But GPUs were going to come at some point. Neural networks were going to work. It's easy. It's predictable. At some point, we were going to hit this threshold and these things were going to happen. Now, would you prefer it be Microsoft doing it? Microsoft or, Amazon or even Apple, a company that just in its DNA doesn't even take the safety argument seriously. That's the counterfactual they're imagining. And then by being there and being at the frontier and without trying to push it any faster than maybe it would otherwise go, although that's the part where maybe you don't buy their argument completely. They certainly, you look at this congressional testimony and sitting there is Demis Hassabis and Dario Amodei and Sam Altman, all of which take the safety arguments extremely seriously. And in the counterfactual world, that's Satya Nadella, who just thinks the faster the better, etc. So I don't even know what I think about this argument. I think it's I do think the people making it are genuine. I think the CEO of Anthropic should be taken at his word in terms of his beliefs. But I also don't quite know where to come down on that. Do you have an opinion?
I really don't. I don't. I find, again, and I've been saying, I'm going to sound like a broken record here, but I've been lamenting for the better part of a year now the difficulty of really wrapping my head around artificial general intelligence and artificial superintelligence. Both of those, I see the one leading to the other very quickly. If the kind of system that I personally define as artificial general intelligence were to emerge, I can imagine systems that are very capable but that are highly compartmentalized emerging that you could argue are general, but that would not necessarily fully satisfy my own, I think, perhaps a bit more rigorous definition. But under the way I think about AGI, a FOOM scenario, artificial superintelligence, seems to logically follow very quickly as opposed to over a longer period of time under most sets of what I think are reasonable assumptions, most circumstances, I suppose you could say. And as a result, I'm finding it very difficult to think clearly, or rather I should say usefully, about those technologies. They do, in some fundamental sense, break my more formal models for understanding and analyzing technologies. They don't seem to adhere or fit the mold of technology disruptions that we've seen in the past. There are too many things about them that are just game-changing. And so instead, my focus has been on trying to understand the implications and the dynamics and the general trajectory forward for increasingly capable, but nevertheless still narrow artificial intelligence of the non-general, non-sapient, non-agentic kind. And those implications are crazy enough, even on a fairly short time horizon. And so as far as paying attention to what's going on in AI, that is getting the majority of my personal and professional attention at the moment, is what's happening in narrow AI and robotics and other applications. For the big one, well, it's a kind of robotics, being autonomous vehicles, the capacity for vehicles to pilot themselves. But other forms of robotics, I think, are going to follow very quickly and be every bit as profound. Humanoid robotics are getting more and more attention. There's certainly a surge of funding going into that space. There's a major surge in interest. And I think that the disruption potential of humanoid robotics, leaving aside other form factors for robots, but in particular humanoid robotics is really quite extraordinary, and on a shorter time frame even still than is widely imagined, for example, by industry. But even admitting all of that, I still find it very difficult to even process the possibility, not necessarily the reality, of course, but the contingents, the possibility that we could have AGI followed very quickly by ASI on a shorter time frame than the already astoundingly close and breakneck pace time frame of disruption by autonomous vehicles and then humanoid robotics. I see the latter unfolding easily to maturity, racing up the standard adoption S-curve that we see. I see that unfolding between now and the mid 2030s, almost to a certainty. I think that I'm very much in the camp that we're really quite close to self-driving vehicle maturity. That humanoid robots will follow on very quickly and prove their worth, especially in factory settings, very quickly. So within the next 5 years, and almost certainly within the next 10 years. But to think that artificial general intelligence could occur on a faster time frame than that, again, as I said, I struggle to really compute this stuff. I defer to you guys now, who are paying much more attention and have a much more detailed and sophisticated understanding of what's happening in AGI, and I lean on you entirely for guidance in that sphere now. So you got to tell me what's happening there, and what do I need to be paying attention to and understanding, and what should I be thinking about and concerned about, and so forth. And in particular, Dan, I'm quite keen to learn more about to my understanding, you have a new project and that sort of thing. If this is a venue in which it's appropriate to talk about that, I'd love to hear more details, and maybe that can become part of this conversation. That would be great. Sure,
yeah. Yeah, on the topic of trying to wrap your head around it, I think everybody is struggling with that, even the insiders. I think nobody has a much better picture than... I suppose I have a slightly better picture because I understand some of the kinetics going on, but fundamentally at a conceptual level, I don't think there is more to know that really informs the view. It's interesting to actually watch the way that, say, Amodei or Altman reason about these things. And the difference between them. So it's interesting to note that the people inside Anthropic, there are lots of physicists, and that's part of the reason why they're actually able to think clearly about this and have predicted maybe not exactly where we are, but not be surprised by where we are, because they took scaling laws seriously. And it was possible for them to do that because, well, physicists are used to basically picking up some basic first principles phenomenon like that and then just seeing where it leads, right? So scaling laws, I mean, maybe actually scaling laws become a topic in undergraduate economics, right? Because the impacts of the current wave of technology will be so profound. But maybe it's not something that economists usually study, critical phenomena and scaling laws, although power laws do show up quite a bit in economics already. Anyway, the point I'm making is that the mistake that I think many people have made is thinking too historically or thinking too economically even, rather than paying attention to some of the features of the phenomenon, e.g. scaling laws that are really new. So that's what people are clinging to. I mean, the people that have seen the furthest and seen the clearest about where we're going to be right now are the people who have disregarded a lot of knowledge of other disciplines and basically just stuck to a narrow view that scaling laws are what matter, and in scaling laws we trust. And well, these are the people now poised to, take advantage of the moment. So but that's a very difficult way of thinking, right? Because it doesn't inform you that much, right? You sort of know roughly. I mean, it's just a belief in exponentials at some level, right? And really making the right decisions in the face of an exponential, as you know very well, is almost an exercise in not paying attention to things as much as it is paying attention to things, because you need to disregard a lot of intuitions that counsel you that certain things just can't happen or can't happen that quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. Very, very familiar territory. Well, so it seems to me, as an outside observer still, and a layman looking at what's happening in AGI, two chief threads of discourse are seem to me to be very prominent. The one is the timeline debate and the discussions and discourse around the timeline. And then, of course, the other is alignment or safety. And these are related, no question about it, in very clear ways. But on the safety, on the alignment question, what I'm still interested in trying to get a clearer sense of, and I don't have a clear personal intuition about this yet at this point, is whether or not a self-aware, sentient, sapient system that has hyper capability. In other words, it can achieve whatever goals it's got by virtue of its intelligence, by force of its intelligence. It's capable enough to achieve goals despite adversarial attempts to thwart it in doing so from humanity, namely. Is a system that is self-aware a greater threat or a lesser threat than one which is hyper-capable but less or not at all sentient, self-aware, sapient? That's sort of one question that I'm still grappling with, and I do look with interest to the discourse to see that debate, and I haven't seen it run out to my satisfaction yet. So that's one question that I'm interested in always in exploring and understanding a little bit better, and just kind of taking whatever seeing whatever your current take on the temperature of that conversation is. That's number one. And then the second thing, which follows out of that and back, I think, to the first thread, the timeline, is are we more likely to or what's a better way to say it? Do hypercapable systems that are generally intelligent, as we might broadly define them, do those emerge before systems that have properties, some non-zero amount of sentience and sapience and self-awareness, or do they does that occur afterwards? In other words, what's the sequencing here? What are the conditions? What are the requirements? So I suppose if I put all of that together in a single narrative or a single phrasing, it would be something like, where do we currently stand in terms of the debate about whether or not sapience is required for general intelligence, and whether or not sapience increases or decreases the safety concerns around alignment/misalignment. And so I'm always keen to get whatever your latest read on the temperature of that conversation is. Does that make sense?
Yeah, interesting. I don't usually think about things this way, but yeah, that's interesting to discuss. I'm sorry, I'm going to do an undergraduate thing and ask for what a definition of sapience is. Do you just mean self-awareness, like a very thorough, so if the system in computing its responses to stimuli from the environment and deciding on actions, you look inside it and you see that it is representing itself as part of the environment and has a pretty good understanding of what it is and its past and its relationship to the environment and other entities in the environment, and is reasoning about itself. That's self-awareness, but sapience means something more than that, I'm guessing. But what more?
I think the main additional element that sapience holds for me that I don't see in a shallower version of self-awareness is a sense of evolution or sense of development, an arc, a trajectory over time. And in order for something to be sapient, to my thinking, there is a sense of a personal narrative. You see yourself as an actor in a story that is unfolding, and you have a memory of your past and a picture, some foresight depiction of your own future, and that those form a cohesive whole that factors into your modeling of yourself in the moment. Yeah. And I would the reason why I distinguish those things is I do suspect that animals are self-aware in some ways, and not in perhaps an extremely deep sense, but they are self-aware and sentient, not just by virtue of mere subjectivity, but that they that especially higher mammals, cetaceans, whales and dolphins, elephants, for example, the animals that we regard as the smartest non-human creatures on the earth, that they show to me signs of sentience and self-awareness. But the reason why I would not characterize them as sapient is primarily because I don't see evidence for the construction of long narratives of their own existence. So they can look at their own past, consider that in the context of the present, and project that into possible futures for themselves, and see all of that as part of their modeling of self. And that to me seems more than just a shallower, more limited modeling of self in the moment for the purposes of the next immediate time step forward in your simulation of reality, as it were. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's clear. Thanks. Well, by that definition, I think, isn't this very predictably going to emerge? I mean, we saw this theory of mind paper that I know you've read, where there's an emergent capability, something that was present in GPT 3.5, but weak and is much stronger in GPT 4, when the system is reasoning about some narrative, it will figure out how to ascribe views and beliefs to the participants that are distinct from somehow the views that are available to someone reading the story. Sort of, you know where the coffee cup is hidden because it's in the story, but the characters in the story don't, etc. So right now the systems don't have a memory apart from sort of an in-context memory while they're processing tokens, but that in-context memory is not to be taken lightly. So that's one topic we're actually studying. I think even if you don't add an explicit external memory like a data bank or something, it's entirely possible that even just within processing a long context window, that the system might come to represent itself and have a theory of mind about things that are in the context it's processing and maybe even about itself. So maybe that window of memory is quite short and wouldn't count as sapient by the definition you just gave. That trajectory would be a very brief trajectory. But if you equip the system with external memory and it actually knows how to use it, which none of the current systems do, but this is a topic of vast investment right now. If you just crack that, well, why wouldn't this be a thing that would happen almost automatically? I mean, it depends on the training process, right? If you're, and also would be a form of sapience that's pretty unlike ours, possibly if it's interacting with many, many millions of contexts simultaneously, right? If you're talking about sort of an instantiation in a particular robot or something, the notion of trajectory or history might be somewhat analogous to ours. But if it's a system that's interacting with millions of contexts and millions of individuals and has memory about all of those, it might be learning and reasoning and thinking about its own trajectory as a system. That seems completely plausible, and that might be sapient by your definition, but in a very different way to us. But I don't see any real fundamental obstacle to that. I don't know that it would be a precondition for doing any particular thing, but it seems, if you believe the theory of mind results and the other emergent capabilities, it doesn't strike me as like really controversial at all to just expect something like that to happen more or less, automatically as a consequence of equipping the system with other capabilities.
Yeah, we have discussed this in the past, and it always shocks my intuition, which only proves how worthless intuition is here. But I always experience this as a sort of a visceral shock to think that it just appears likely as though this extraordinary faculty that human minds have could just emerge as a product of increasingly large and sophisticated systems of the kind that we already have. But obviously, in a certain sense, that shouldn't be a surprise at all. I mean, evolution
That's right. Yeah.
discovered that by searching not too terribly comprehensively in the space of all possible minds. I mean, evolution discovered that by searching forward from our primate ancestors, mostly by just adding brain horsepower, as it were, is what it seems like. So I suppose this is a humbling thing as well. But as I think about what the next generation of proposed systems that I'm reading about, Gemini being one, I believe that's Google's, the GPT-5, the successor to GPT-4, for example, there's rumblings about whether or not elements of that are in development, even if the whole system isn't, or if that's just sort of weasel words to say, well, we're not really developing GPT-5, but we kind of are. One thing that I'm interested there kind of harkens back to some work.
They've never said they're not developing it. They said they weren't training it.
Okay, so it's even more weaselly than that. Gotcha.
Of course, nobody should think that they're not madly at work developing it. Of course not.
Yeah, that's right. But I'm thinking back to, I forget, when was it? Maybe it was several years ago now, maybe 3 or 4 years ago now, that Drexler published a paper that we talked about before about the case, this comprehensive AI services. Yeah. And when I saw the sort of approach that, I think I was reading about it with Gemini, with basically the admission that I think is suspected is also, under the hood of GPT-4, is that there are lots and lots and lots of modules, as it were, that these systems that we are interfacing with as end users are, it's the front end of not a single system, but a big hodgepodge, a big collection of systems that are patchwork, connected together. And to I guess to my mind, that did really seem like a strong candidate for being the first type of system to qualify as what one would, what a reasonable observer would admit to being general intelligence. That for probably the better part of the last year, as we've been discussing this, I've been thinking, well, that's probably the way we're going to get to what people first agree is general intelligence. And then I've held this belief, which I've voiced in here in the past, which is that I don't think that gets us all the way across the line necessarily to true generality and then to superintelligence, because I do, perhaps naively, and again driven by intuition, so I'm probably wrong, but I have suspected, I can continue to suspect, that what I've described as sentience and sapience are both very, very useful. They're and that they may prove to be requisite for full generality and indeed superintelligence. Not nice to have emergent properties of those systems, but requisite. And the main source of my intuition for that suspicion is, again, biological evolution. Sure, biology discovers things by accident and is not maximally efficient. It's not a designer. It's just a brute force discoverer. But having said that, it's also efficient. Evolution winnows away things that are surplus to requirements very, very aggressively and very quickly in evolutionary time. And so if sapience was not valuable, if it didn't have utility serving the generality of human intelligence, then the base supposition there would have to be we have to. A better way to say that is, it looks from a biological and evolutionary perspective as though sapience is requisite because it is so valuable to intelligence and capability. And so that's why I still have this supposition that cracking that code is going to be a key enabler of generality and then on into superintelligence. But for a long time, I thought, well, we're not close to that. So maybe the case approach will achieve a generality in it by way of quite a different path sooner. And I think at least judging by discussions we've had in the past here in the series and ones that I've had elsewhere, it seems, at least to my naive eye, that the case general intelligence would be easier to align than an agentic sapient general intelligence, because a case intelligence sort of emerges out of comprehensive collective services, as is right there in the name, and there isn't sort of there's no agent there that's attempting to thwart your efforts to control it or direct it or repurpose it or whatever, and you can shut it down one bit at a time if it's giving you some problems. Anyway, I think we can unpack it if it's necessary, but I think for our purposes here, my supposition is just that the case system is less dangerous and less likely to run out of control in terms of alignment and safety than a system that from which sapience emerges as a property. And again, I could be completely wrong about all of this, but I was taking some solace in the idea that A, the case approach is likely to get across the line first, and B, it's likely to be the safer alternative pathway. And now it's looking like both of those damn things are false and wrong. It's looking like it's not going to win the race from what you're describing, and it's looking like the thing that is going to lose the race is the more dangerous kind of general intelligence. Oh man! And so this is, now I'm this got me quaking in my boots a bit now.
Yeah, I think quaking is the correct epistemic state. There's an update to the case story that Drexler posted to LessWrong. I don't know if you read that, but you might enjoy that. It just kind of, I think the basic story holds up. I think it was quite a prescient article. It's basically a book, right? There have been, and I think many people agree that this looks like an intrinsically safer approach, and maybe their authors don't think of them as variants of case, but many people have put forward variants on this, where you'll attempt to engineer systems that are made of pieces that you somewhat understand, and then you understand how they're plugged together, and then that's intrinsically safer. So Conjecture is a AI safety-oriented startup in London, has some ideas along those lines, but making use of large language models. Davidad, as he's known in the community, has a fairly well-developed plan for making safe AGI that's, as far as I understand it, I'm not totally up on the details, similar in some respects the case. So I think many, many people share this view that this should be the way we do it. But yes, you're right, this is not appearing to be the case. I want to come back to your questions earlier about what we're up to regarding AI safety research and what the state of that is. But before I do that, I want to dwell on the discussion of how to think properly about the moment we're in, because there's a point of overlap, I think, between your professional interests and some of the things the group that I'm a part of is going to start trying to do. So there's an Open Philanthropy is a funding organization, makes many kinds of grants, but in particular to AI safety. And they have a call for course development grants, where they want to see more courses taught on a variety of topics, but including AI safety. And we're going to put in an application, and we were discussing last night actually what that should be about. And there's a few options, but one that occurred to me was that I've had many conversations over the past year with people, and it's very clear that to get them properly concerned and therefore motivated to act on the topic of safety, you need to first convince them that something dramatic is happening. And although you might say everybody believes that because we had the ChatGPT moment and people are sort of properly knocked back on their heels regarding progress in the last year, I think still most people's intuition, I could be wrong about this, but I think most people's intuition still are that we're going to top out sometime soon with something that's like an assistant, like the Star Trek computer, which is amazing and can do an awesome variety of tasks and will change the economy and et cetera, so very disruptive. But that people envisage something more or less like the current iteration, GPT-4, just like with the rough edges taken off and less hallucinations and so on. And I think this is profoundly wrong and really missing the basic principles that are at play here. And I would like to do a few things. I would like there to be some kind of TED Talk sized and styled thing, which basically explains to people the story that I'm often repeating, and which I think you understand very well, about like how we got to where we are, which is not the usual. I mean, people emphasize the wrong things often when they're talking about the history of deep learning. Like what's really new about this iteration. So scaling laws, emergent capabilities, the fact that reasoning is without a doubt taking place in these systems, which many people still feel like ambivalent about or a bit cautious in saying very explicitly, and they should not be. We can look inside enough of these systems to know that, well, whatever's happening, and we have very little understanding of what's happening in general, but in enough cases we can look inside and see that there's algorithms in there more or less like what we would imagine doing if we were tasked to solve the problem the networks are trying to solve. There's enough cases like that where we can see that indeed something like processing of the kind we would call reasoning is taking place. Currently limited, still not as sharp and general as, say, pure mathematics. But if most people going about their daily lives can be called reasoning, right, then certainly these systems are reasoning. Not in exactly the same way, and still in some respects quite shallow and patchworky and etc. But to stick to the belief that reasoning is somehow a threshold that hasn't been crossed is completely delusional. And I think really these dots need to be connected for people, and the strength of the evidence needs to be put forward in a way that just blasts away the lingering doubt people have that there's something special about human intelligence that somehow remains ineffable and out of the reach of this kind of trajectory we're on. Like we don't know for sure where we're going, but I think the only people standing around who really seem to have the weight of reason behind them are people like Dario Amodei and Sam Altman and so on, who, I mean, you just think from first principles and this is the prediction you make, and it's a shocking prediction, but I feel like there's just not enough updating in this direction, and still people hanging out for evidence or waiting for news to arrive that has already arrived. So I'd like to put together two things, something quite brief that is high level but very forceful, which makes this case, so that decision makers and basically people without a lot of time to look into the details can get the message. And I'd also like to put together a longer course which is extremely detailed and makes this case from beginning to end. And this is missing. So I think the AI safety community have several critiques, but one of them is that not enough homework is being done. People take for granted there are lots of gaps in the arguments, lots of places where you can get off the train and be skeptical in ways that I don't think are any longer justified. And I think it would be important for some group to do this homework and lay out the evidence in a way that is quite comprehensive. And that would take the form of a course. So I was thinking of applying to the open philanthropy process for that course. And I would like to pitch that maybe if you and Rethink X would be interested in the first part, collaborating on that, because I think it's very important and we have the technical background to do a good job of it. And you're, of course, very plugged into and know how to reach the right people in terms of how to shape the message and so on. Would bet that'd be something you'd be interested in.
That I can take to our founders. It's not something that I can make a call on. I think it's too big and too important for that. It's obviously something that I completely agree with you about and see the value in. The question would be whether it's a fit for Rethink X as an organization and what we do, to support it explicitly or to support it more indirectly than that. One thing that I can absolutely do is try to function both personally and as an organization as a catalyst and hopefully a node closer to the network where you would want to be effective. And that can be for a lot of purposes. One of the things that you describe sounds like a communications project. I can definitely facilitate connections and facilitate figure out a way to facilitate that and make that happen. I can definitely help that in that respect for that project, the communications project. And I fully agree the importance of communicating that to the world, to the general public, and then more specifically to sort of key audiences is of immense importance and potential value. So I'm very happy to work to help make that case, and then figure out how to bring that to fruition. Regardless of whether or not this is something that has Rethink X as a brand attached to it in any explicit way or not.
Yeah.
Certainly. The second thing, it strikes me, is that I love the idea that you're of developing a course. I love the idea of a more detailed, something more detailed that gets down into the weeds, that really lays the whole thing out. Certainly, I agree with that. The only thing I would be a little bit concerned about or skeptical about is you going through the traditional grant making process for that. And by that token, what I mean is that you're going to put a lot of work into not getting much out of it, when what would be, I'm sure you're aware of this, but what would be a much more ideal scenario would be for some interested party with very deep pockets to not make you jump through any serious hoops at all in order to get funding in support of a project like this. Now, if the development of a course in association with a specific group that makes grants gives that course notoriety and serves other purposes behind, in terms of disseminating it and making it accessible and so forth, okay, that's something different. But if it's just in terms of, support is required for the development of it, then because again I'm out of academia now, I'm skeptical of anything that looks like an academic grant making process, because it's too slow and you get pennies and not dollars out of it, and for a huge amount of work. What you need to do instead is be connected to the right people and the right sources of support, so that you can streamline that whole process and then get a quantity of support funding, namely, but more than that, if you need more than that, other human resources of various kinds, whatever those might be, as forms of support, and you need to get those quickly. So, and I think that there's, I certainly can't make any promises. I wish I was, I wish I rolled in those circles personally. I don't, but I can certainly offer some of my own, help in accessing, getting into the getting connected to the sorts of networks where those resources are available, and where there's much greater potential, I think, to get the level of support and to get it fast than you would find in a typical, more academic grant making environment. So those would be my two ways of reacting to that, support, but then also, I'm concerned you need to set your sights a bit higher and more ambitiously on, especially on a topic for which there are a lot of gazillionaires out there who are talking big game about AI safety, and let's see them put all of those dollars they've got, but let's see them put their money where their mouth is as far as supporting real research programs go. So I don't think this is a totally unrealistic ask either. If you were talking about something that's much more esoteric, and getting a big amount of support for that, then it would be a different story. That would be a taller hill to climb. But I suspect with the pedigree that you're coming from, the prestige of the folks that you're working with and the work that you've done in the past, that this is the kind of thing that you could take to sources of funding outside of the traditional academic grant-making pathways and have a decent likelihood of success in whatever you're asking for. And another thing in my experience is that you have to sometimes it's better to ask. Sometimes it's better to play big and ask for a lot and be taken seriously than to ask for less and be dismissed as a not serious kind of player. And so there's a scale effect there as well. It seems perverse, but if you ask for $10 million, you're more likely to get it than if you ask for $10,000. Because people say, "Oh, you need 10 million? You must be serious." So it's just a different kind of thinking, I think, that and we can take this offline outside of this, obviously, this seminar and this venue for discussing this. But yeah, I think that this is something that we need to consider quite seriously. If you are now in the process of putting together a real research agenda and a real comms, strategic communications agenda around this issue in a way that you are not seeing anybody else do adequately. And obviously there's an importance to this. Obviously there's an urgency to this. And if you are not seeing either of those interests being served adequately elsewhere by other parties, then that read, I have every faith that read is accurate. And then you can take that reading to others and they will be able to confirm that that's accurate. And then the checkbooks hopefully will come out. And you can get rolling on this. And hopefully this is something that could happen on a time frame of months and not a time frame of years. And perhaps even faster than that, depending.
Yeah, to be clear, the Open Philanthropy is not an academic grant maker, and behind them is billionaires interested in this topic.
Okay, all right, great. It's good to hear.
But I don't actually know off the top of my head what the scale of the grants they're making is. This funding environment for AI safety is changing rapidly, but also, we may not succeed in getting this grant, in which case it would obviously be appropriate to be looking elsewhere as well.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly hear a lot of talk about AI safety and the importance of research into it. But the talk, I don't see then, I don't read news articles talking about how, Harvard and MIT and Stanford and Princeton are all setting up research institutes for this, which, you would imagine they would be if there was if people were walking the walk and not just talking the talk. So
the problem is at the moment that it's not clear what to do. So you can be very concerned about the problem, but there aren't so many concrete research agendas, you can't set up a research center at a high status institution whose goal is to kind of figure out what to do. That's changing a little bit. So Max Tegmark, who you certainly know, has been very active in promoting interpretability work within physics over the last years. So that's quite an important change. He's been very vocal about AI safety for a long time, of course. Yeah, I expect it is a matter of time, but at the moment it's really quite... one of the things about the situation that is the most concerning is that there really aren't that many good ideas. So maybe it's worth me explaining what the current approaches are as I understand them. So the approaches to alignment. So again, alignment is the problem of figuring out how to aim advanced AI systems so that when you turn them on, they work towards the goals that you have decided ahead of time and not some other things, whatever those goals may be. It's not the problem of figuring out the, essential human values or something. That's a separate, important problem. So how to align a system that's much more intelligent than you is, I think clearly, it shouldn't be obvious that it's possible or easy. One can argue about those things, and it's worth doing that, but let's just accept that it isn't trivial. So then the approaches that exist inside well-funded organizations, like, let's take the big labs for now, so DeepMind, OpenAI, Anthropic. The plans basically, it's a little hard to summarize them in a way that doesn't sound kind of judgmental or something. So in the current generation, there's something called RLHF, reinforcement learning from human feedback, where they take these systems that are pre-trained on large internet text to predict the next token and transform them into chatbots, which are ideally not offensive and refuse to provide recipes for anthrax and such things. So the raw model will do all of those things, but will switch between responding to that and then some other tangent, because it's just predicting the next token and not really actively trying to shape it into a narrative or a conversation or an interaction with an assistant. So RLHF, no, I don't think anybody really believes that it destroys those negative aspects, like the willing anthrax collaborator. It just hides them and prevents them from really like being an active part of producing the response. Okay, so there are people, both the CEOs of labs, Anthropic and OpenAI, and also heads of the sort of safety teams on record saying that, of course, this technique will not be the real solution when superintelligent systems come around. It's just okay and perhaps not even really very good for the current generations of systems. There are plenty of jailbreaks and everybody knows it, and nobody knows if there's a fundamental solution in this direction. So it's a stopgap that is good enough to produce economically valuable systems. And that's fine. I like the systems that they've produced using this technique, but it's not a solution to alignment, and nobody serious thinks so. So what are they planning to do? Well, frankly, they don't know. That's why they're kind of freaking out, and why it's appropriate for other people to freak out. So they have ideas for plans to have ideas. So OpenAI's plan is to spend a lot of compute to scale up some sort of automated research into models. The basic plan is to understand how the models work internally, so you can look inside like with an X-ray or kind of MRI, some sort of analogy like that, and figure out if it's doing a lot of planning that isn't reflected in its final outputs, so that somehow something sneaky is going on and it's maybe representing deception. Maybe you could detect that. So those hopes that we might be able to get a more internal understanding play a very central role in how the people at the forefront of this field and with the resources are thinking. But it's a plan to have a plan in both the case of OpenAI and Anthropic. They don't know. They have various lines of research, and they're hoping some of them pan out, and that then there will be a plan for a concrete research agenda that in principle might lead to a system for aligning superintelligence. That's the best anybody can do, and I'm really not criticizing that. That is, they're working very hard on it. They're brilliant people, and to say it's a plan to have a plan is an accurate statement of facts, not a judgment. But clearly, looking from the outside at both the self-stated prospect of doom and that the approach to alignment is a plan to have a plan hardly leaves you feeling very confident about the future if you accept the fact that capabilities will continue to advance, which maybe they won't, but it seems likely they will. So that's in a nutshell, the cause for concern or alarm about the state of this research. I can go on to describe what we're working on, but anything about that I can clarify.
No, that's great. And the yeah, I mean, I'm now hungry to get a preview you of what you would say in a short TEDx style compelling talk. I presume that this is what you just described as part of it, and then what hopefully you'll go on to talk about is the next part of it, or
I think it's too premature to talk about our own research because it's no better really than what I described, and certainly much more premature than the lines of research being pursued in the big labs. No, I wasn't even really sure that the TEDx style talk would be describing alignment, because what I'm really concerned about is the step before that, right? So you can sort of think of it as maybe two steps. One is really dispelling the idea, like just to get people to see clearly the world that they're in, right? And like to have appropriate expectations about the range of probabilities of what's coming next. To go from, I think people must be in a very strange state of cognitive dissonance where the world seems more or less to be as it was. And, it's not like most people are freaking out, but then you have the CEO of Philanthropy saying that maybe in 2 to 3 years, we have a system that's at the level of a generally well-educated adult. Like how do you reconcile that, which seems like a mad statement, just completely mad. And that's, like, how do you see inside that worldview to just understand the exponential curve that he's seeing? And then, like, personally, I'm sure he feels that's wild too, right? Like, just completely wild. But he's looking at the curve and being like, well, that's what the exponential says. So my feelings, whatever I feel is reasonable or not, I have to put that aside and sort of just trust in the capacity for reason and the evidence in front of me. I really want to be able to get people to occupy that view more fully in a way that allows them to move past the sort of their lying eyes when they look around and just see that things don't seem to be consistent with that future coming in 2 to 3 years. If that makes sense. Once you buy that, and once you really lose the confidence, people have this unjustified confidence in things kind of stopping or slowing down or tapping out. There's really no reason to believe that, but this is people's default position. And I think it's important to first snap them out of that, and then they're ready to hear, like, the fact that we don't know what's going to happen when we get a few steps further along this process. And then you can start talking to them about alignment. But the conversations I've had with people generally get bogged down in the first step, which, if you don't buy the first step, there's no point telling you about the second part because you just don't think it's even really necessary, right?
So what would you need to develop and then, or is this a question that you're asking, or do you have a clear idea yet? I guess this is two distinct things. But so I'll ask it as a question. Do you have a clear idea right now of what you would need in order to develop, record, and then disseminate and promulgate a message like that with a video or talk, etc.? Do you have a clear vision for what that is and how to produce it now, or is that something that you're still exploring and trying to plan and put together?
It's still very early, so I don't. The shorter talk with high production values or whatever, I have no experience in producing something like that. So, you would know much better than me what it would take to do that. The team of people who would be able to work on it sort of already exists among my students and former students who are very capable technically, and some of them have quite good at exposition and communication. So I think in terms of more people would be needed, but there's a core of people there who could do the work. Mostly, I guess my attention sort of naturally goes to the more course level thing. That's what the grant was asking for, and what I'm good at. So I sort of think I know how to prepare that. It's just a matter of formalizing a lot of the stuff I've been talking to people about, and it's sort of more or less the material I feel like is in my head or in various places, and I just need to draw it together and flesh it out. And I know the people around me who could do that and do a good job of it. The shorter thing is more uncertain for me. It's less outside. I mean, it's less inside my comfort zone.
Yeah, my team has gone through the exercise several times to different members of the team, and for different purposes. We've gone through the exercise of trying to take a message that we feel is extremely important, but is in some sense challenging to communicate because of a combination of existing barriers that people have to naturally resist the content of the message because it's unintuitive and it runs contrary to the existing status quo and incumbent interests and presumptions and so forth, and that it's challenging because the content itself is sort of sophisticated enough to be not immediately obvious. It requires some substantial explanation in order to walk an audience member through the reasoning such that they come away thinking, oh, wow, that I get that now. That really makes sense. It's not obvious, but now that you explain it to me, I get it. And we've gone through the exercise of trying to package up and then communicate content that has those properties a number of times now, and it is a real challenge. It takes a lot of iteration, basically, lots and lots and lots of drafting, and we've done a lot of that internally with capable people on our team, and we've also, in different times, hired in professional consulting assistance for that. We have turned to experts in communications to advise on and help us, go through a disciplined process of distilling and crafting the content and the message. And this is all just basically to get a screenplay drafted. Yeah. Then the process of production itself is much more straightforward, depending on what you're envisioning that result being. The resources and the talent, human talent, and the physical resources that are necessary to produce a high quality video of someone speaking or whatever it is that you'll ultimately end up envisioning, those are pretty accessible. Those are available. They'll certainly be available in Melbourne and almost certainly at the university itself, if not in a lot of variety of private facilities and so forth. But what the real work is in honing and crafting the script, basically, and that takes a lot of time. And we really did benefit from outside perspectives, walking us through a standard process, disciplined process of message building and figuring out, okay, what are you really trying to communicate? What are the key messages? What are the real stumbling blocks to getting your audience to understand it and so forth. So that is not trivial. Some people have just a marvelously blinding knack and ability to do that. Tony is an example of a person who just naturally has an extraordinary ability to take what's pretty tough content. It's not obvious and immediately apparent, and just communicate it in a stellar way. He's very, very good at that. But it's hard. That's the hard part. I'm happy to take this conversation offline and work with you, Dan, to figure out, how do you advance that as a project, take steps forward and end up with a finished product that really would be great to turn into a message that then one would hope would get really wide dissemination, something that ideally would go viral, right? If it's just like a super clear and powerful explainer or primer for the topic, but that it would start with some disciplined process for outlining and then crafting this message, what the message is that you're trying to convey. As for the course, I can't offer that much input into that. That's the minutia, the details, the technical stuff, all of that stuff. That is right within your wheelhouse, and you can develop that, better than anybody else.
Yeah,
but on the actual, the video production side and that, I'm happy to have some more conversations about how to move that further along.
Yeah, that would be much appreciated. On the topic of the course, I mean, I guess what I would ask of you when we start thinking about what to put in it is, well, obviously, you might have a better mental model of the kind of person who should benefit from that, like for e.g. the members of your own team, right, who technically competent, smart people, interested in the topic perhaps, maybe, as in Owen's case, a bit skeptical of some of the aspects. Like where to go deep and where not to go deep, what topics to cover. So I'll be getting your advice when we start thinking more about what goes in that on.
Sure.
Just as an outside voice on the things. I mean, otherwise we might drift into like the kinds of things that, mathematicians or technical people in this area are likely to be more interested in, rather than the things that sort of really need to go front and center.
I'm of course happy to help with that in any way that I can, obviously.
Cool. All right. I guess we only have a few minutes left. Was there something I said I was going to say and then we have not come back to? I guess I could say something briefly about the kind of research we're trying to do. So we, as Jesse Hoogland, Alexander Oldenziel, Stan Van Wingeden, myself, are kind of the ringleaders, but there's many talented young people starting to work on this agenda as well, including some of my own students, Susan Way, my collaborator at the University of Melbourne. So what we're trying to do is, well, basically along the lines of a lot of what these big labs are trying to do, just with a different angle on it that may be more fundamental. So I think everybody agrees that if we're going to build big blobs of compute, like GPT kind of models, if that's the path to AGI, then it seems quite hard to imagine we'll ever feel confident such systems are safe if we don't have a better understanding of what they're doing and how they're doing what they're doing. So you could ask for a more fundamental science of that. I think what we have to offer is that singular learning theory, this piece of mathematics / physics / statistics, very deep theory, does seem like it, somewhat surprisingly, has non-trivial things to say about the way in which structure forms in these systems over the course of training. So that's a point of view that it's starting to be studied quite intensely, but historically hasn't been studied much. So it's kind of like the developmental biology take on how structure gets into these large neural networks, where instead of looking at the final organism and then trying to take a reductionist view of taking it apart and trying to intervene to figure out what vein connects to what tissue, and therefore try and work out what a tissue does by feeding stuff in and seeing what happens. You rather start with the embryo and then watch it over the course of development, and the logic of development tells you a lot about function. That's the basic principle of a large part of biology, developmental biology. It's a basic technique we've used to understand living systems. And there are many differences between living systems and neural networks. There isn't as much of a role of evolution in neural networks, of course, a little bit because the architectures and training optimizers we've used have kind of evolved in some way over the course of the decades of our research. But that's a very weak set of information compared to the biases that evolution builds into the process of development. So there are differences, but there are also, as there are often in nature, similarities because they're governed by underlying mathematics that is the same. So there is a field of developmental biology that uses something called bifurcations, which basically just means the points in development where you could go one way or the other and you choose one way, and the nature of that choice. That's something of what a bifurcation is. So stem cells, for example, will choose, in some sense, what kind of tissue to become in response to environmental factors and their own internal programming. Those choice points, you make several choices on the way to becoming a red blood cell, for instance. Those choice points have a certain statistical and mathematical characteristic, which you can isolate and study, and people in biology do that. And the underlying mathematics also applies to the development of neural networks over the course of training. So, yeah, our idea is to basically take that very seriously, and we're trying to start. I mean, we have done some experiments and have some papers in the works, and we'll be doing more. And we got a little bit of funding to work on that, as I mentioned in my email, and hopefully we'll get more. So that's the agenda. The difference between just hoping to figure something out is that there really are kind of deep mathematical principles at work here, which make you feel that, I mean, it still may not work or be true, but there's like some kind of path towards understanding based on principles rather than just hoping to get lucky, although we will have to get lucky. Yeah, so that's the short version of what we're up to.
Wow, that's amazing. That sounds super, super cool. I look forward to continuing to learn more about it. Man, sounds awesome. And I need to watch some of I need to go back and watch the back catalog of the Singularity learning theory seminars too. I haven't watched enough of those. So those are definitely things I need to check on. But anyway, thanks, Dan. This is great. And yeah, let's keep this conversation going offline, okay?
Yep, sounds good. Thanks, Matt.
Awesome. Great. Take care.
See ya.